Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of SpeakEasy with Eric and Cory. It's been a while. Feels like we've been off for 6 months, but I think honestly it's been about a month. So a lot's happened in the industry, and that's kind of the point of this episode. We want to give an update to you guys on what's going on. You probably don't follow it as closely as we do, obviously, but major changes brewing, worth talking about. Want to inform people of what they should be thinking about, and do they need to take any action now? So what's changed? What's been it's hard to even pinpoint it, right? Because I say what's changed, you're going to be like, since when? Yeah. The last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? It just keeps changing. So
a lot has changed.
We talked about the tariffs, right, and how impactful that could be. And the tariffs have largely, at this point, kind of subsided. The price impact of that flared up. It was baked into the chaos factor of how we run our business and plan for disaster. And it has since kind of come down, and we've been able to more or less move on.
It's funny, though, like, we're talking about those tariffs in terms of it being like a blip. That was a big deal. The tariff thing was a big deal for the solar industry. And as the tariffs became a non-factor for on a temporary basis, we got kicked in another way. So like
it was literally
we got 48 hours of relief.
No, it wasn't 48 hours. It was like we got the news and we're like, whew, stability, right? We relish these little moments of stability. And then it was 24 hours later, or less than 24 hours later, boom, right? Here's the update. The Congress is talking about
the big beautiful bill.
The big beautiful bill, right? Congress is talking about eliminating solar subsidies well ahead of schedule. And it was like an evolving thing, right? Like you heard about it initially.
No,
and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of ignored it. You know, I've been in solar a long time, so have you. You hear about this, it pops up. The tax credit has a long history, and it's been kind of at the point of expiration and then renewed, and expiration and renewed, and like it just keeps happening. So someone talking about it like potentially not going full term, it's kind of normal. But then it developed and kept developing, and then it became very real very fast. So I'll give like the Reader's Digest version for anyone that's not panic updating themselves at their favorite news site and trying to figure out what's going on with this bill. But essentially, the way it should work, right, when Congress is supposed to pass bills, it needs more than simply a simple majority, right? It needs to have whatever it is. I think in the Senate, they need 60 votes. Yeah, essentially like 2/3. So you're basically forced to work with both parties. You can't just jam it through without any kind of like concessions or let's talk about this, right? That makes sense. I think everyone would generally agree. That's a good way to pass laws and bills. So what's different here is they're using budget reconciliation, which is just that, right? It's a way of amending the budget, and then they can pass something with a simple majority. Republicans control all chambers right now, so they can basically pass something with their own majority with zero Democrat input, intervention, whatever. So that's what makes this a little bit dangerous. And, you know, if we're being honest, we're basically taking Trump's entire agenda and saying, let's jam it into this one budget reconciliation bill, make it happen. It's ridiculous. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. This is not the way to get stuff done. This is ridiculous.
The biggest problem that I have with this whole thing is I think that people that are behind Trump oftentimes hear the general idea of something and go, yes, I want that. And they just back it wholeheartedly without understanding all of the caveats, because they're packing so much stuff into this big, beautiful bill that it's not the general idea that, because it's a budget thing, right? Hey, let's reduce taxes or keep taxes where they are and keep them from being raised. Whatever the case is, that doesn't sound bad on the surface, right? But look at what else is going to be impacted if this passes. And that's the thing that I think always gets missed in this. Everybody looks at the general idea.
So I guess I skipped that step, but the whole point of why this is really happening and why there's so much in here, not just solar tax credit expiration, but a lot of different things, is Trump's tax cuts from 2017 are set to expire. So if they don't find a way to renew it, we're all going to pay more in taxes. So essentially, this is a bit of a panic. Like, we have to the end of the year to find a whole bunch of money, trillions of dollars, to offset these tax cuts, right? And there's no way Donald Trump is going to be the president that increased taxes on everyday people. So right. Here we are, right? So again, back to this process, it started as, hey, solar tax credit, it's on the docket. And then it turned into like, hey, it's going to expire this year, right? Opposed to it was supposed to expire 10 years later.
2035.
2035 was the full expiration, right? So it's pretty dramatic. And then there's multiple forms of this tax credit, depending on how you finance the system. And then it became all forms of the tax credit are gone. And then there's even this notice of like having construction started within 60 days to qualify. So it went from we had 10 and a half years to build projects with some sort of subsidies, right? We're all investing in this, building businesses, to you might have a couple months notice to figure this out, So yeah, it's a bit alarming. For us, it's extremely, we had a couple dark days where we have to go into the think tank and like, you have to allow yourself to be like, what happens if worst case scenario, right? How many times have we done that for how many different things? So not different, but this one felt the most extreme probably of any time we've had to do that.
I've never related to the little dog sitting in the room that's on fire, saying this is fine.
This is fine.
More in my life. Like I have that sticker on my truck.
Yeah.
I think it's because I'm in the solar industry. Poor guy. I get it.
Makes sense. Hey, I got a pop quiz for you.
Okay.
Do you know which president started the tax credit? Now, there was like some Jimmy Carter 1970 solar thermal tax credit. I'm not talking about that. The modern tax credit as it applies to PV. Which president started that?
I'm going to shoot my shot at W. Bush.
Correct. In 2005. So
that was just a guess based on timing of when I thought the tax credit came to be. So I had a little bit of education.
And
there.
it wasn't specifically solar. It was more like residential energy production credit.
Right.
I think that was more or less the verbiage. And there was a 30%, but a cap of $2,000, right? So it was a semi-limited incentive at only $2,000. And then I believe, going off memory here, but the history of it was 2006, Bush extended it again. And then in 2008, when the economic collapse happened, there was a whole bunch of bills passing, obviously, to try to help the economy and businesses. And I believe at that point, it got extended and they took the cap off of $2,000. So it became a true 30% tax credit.
Interesting.
Right. And then I believe the next touch point was Obama. So extended by Bush, a pretty significant extension. Then it was extended by Obama. And then, believe it or not, in 2020, Trump extended it another 2 years himself. And then the big one was in 2022, Biden extended it for, I think, 12 years, essentially.
Yeah.
And that was the Inflation Reduction Act, which obviously a lot of people, Republican Party hate, so, and are actively trying to dismantle. But that's kind of the history, right? It was started by Republicans. It was extended by Republicans, extended by Trump. So this has been something that's got a long history, and it's not just all Democrats. So
yeah, a long history of Republican and Democratic presidents being behind it. And Trump served an entire presidency and extended this and, seemingly, I don't want to say supported it, but like didn't attack it at that point. So it is interesting for it to be so early in his presidency and this being such a sticking point, being attacked with an insane timeline to pull the rug out from under an entire industry. This is hard.
Right. So what's left? The Budget Committee advanced it, and the House of Representatives, they're a bunch of spineless cowards, so they just kicked the can to the Senate and said, you deal with it, here's a pile of shit. And I'd like to think that the Senate's the adults in the room, so they're the ones that are going to have the actual, does this balance? Because right now, what I'm hearing is they're saying, no, this is going to add a ton to the national debt. Like, this doesn't math, right? It's a feel-good story, it doesn't math, and all these sunsetting of different programs are going to be highly problematic. So there's still a pretty big hurdle, but that's all it is, right? Republicans have the numbers to pass this, but they seem to be rewriting it. So there's some hope that's not going to go through as dramatic, but that's where we are at live today.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, you talking about the adults in the room, like, what is the point of the House of Representatives if they can get a bill that looks like complete shit and go, no, we don't want to deal with that. Give it to the Senate. They'll make it better.
Well, even worse. They didn't just
crazy.
They made it worse. They added in more stuff, like right. I think the amendments they made actually made it harsher.
You're right.
So it's almost like they're saying, like, it's like the version of like, hey, let's just let's ask for 50% over asking price, but when we negotiate, there's more room. So they just made it as bad as possible, so the Senate would have to like
do more work.
When they make their concessions, it's closer to what they wanted. You know, and I get that technique, but to your point, like, well, what are we doing here? They passed this thing mostly because they just didn't want to piss the president off, not because it made sense on paper.
Yeah.
So, anyways, moving on. So, let's get into subsidies a little bit. Like, just generally speaking, like, are subsidies necessary? I've seen a lot of people post recently since this, well, solar shouldn't be subsidized. Why? Other energy isn't subsidized, which is kind of funny because
That's
fossil
not
fuel
true.
subsidies have existed, don't have the exact number, 50 to 100 years. There's always been a form of some subsidies for fossil fuel. I think the most recent number I saw is fossil fuels get about $20 billion a year still. That's hard to track, but
Oh, is
like,
that all?
yeah, I mean, it's not a small number, right? But the point is, there's subsidies in energy. There always has been. What's the point of a subsidy? When they started it, it was to bring domestic energy, obviously, to the United States. Like, we didn't want to have to rely on other countries, whether it was oil or gas or electricity from our neighboring countries. Like, we wanted to have it domestic. That's why we subsidized it. That's why it's still subsidized. So the idea of solar being subsidized isn't a new thing. It's not an independent thing. Is there more money funneling to the renewable solar and wind than there is fossil fuels? Yeah, I believe that to be true in its current state. But then again, fossil fuels have been around for how long? They've had a lot longer runway to mature and get away from subsidies.
Yeah, established industry that
Right.
we're reliant on. So
And if you ask me, right, I'm not the tech nerd when it comes to all this stuff. I've resisted AI. I've never used ChatGPT, but my sense is that our energy demand has gone up. I think it's 2x in the last 50 years, but look at the demand based on everything with AI and electrification. I don't think we're going into a position of needing a less electricity. So the idea of cutting off solar at the knees when we're still importing significant power from Canada and Mexico, right? We're net importers of electricity. It just seems fundamentally dumb. Like, I don't know a better way to say it. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, why would we do that?
when you look at this in terms of like customers that we give solar proposals to, you don't want to be a net importer of energy. That's not the way to lower your costs, right? So why does the country want to be a net importer? Let's generate what we need here, just like we propose solar to customers to do.
I feel like I've used this analogy a lot about subsidies, right? And if we're being honest, me and you've had these conversations before about subsidies, and we would love to dream up a world without subsidies, because what it means is the riffraff goes away, right? Sometimes subsidies mean they're helping energy adoption or keeping it in the country, and sometimes it means some greedy salesperson is just simply putting it in their pocket and it's not actually hitting the end user. And I recognize that that's real and it's a problem, but it's not everyone. So the idea that like a subsidy-free environment might be better in our minds because it cleans it up a little bit. It means the industry's more mature.
Not like
there
this.
has to be a runway, right? You can't just flip the light switch off with a couple month notice.
It's just like I was saying about the big beautiful bill. It just doesn't need to be like this. It doesn't need to be. You like the idea, the way that something sounds. Hey, no subsidies for solar. That sounds good. Let's work towards that. No, 60 days.
Yeah.
I can't.
So
be
the
that way.
analogy I was going to use, and it fits right in what you're saying. I forgot. I said I had an analogy, and then I just never did one. Is domestic manufacturing, right? American manufacturing. That's the point of the tariffs. That sounds really good,
Yep.
right? It sounds really good. But if you just say tariffs and we're trying to promote domestic manufacturing right now, that sounds really good. And we're like, cool, let's get there. But you can't do it in a couple months.
Imagine this. A retroactive tariff if domestic manufacturing isn't met by a certain date. So you can warn everybody, all these manufacturers, if you don't bring it here.
Don't you think too smart.
Oh,
right?
okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, don't do that. You got to get way more emotional with this. And
Right now I'm the House of Representatives. I need to be more like a senator. Okay, got it.
so, anyways, point being is, right, we just went through this exercise with tariffs. We all love the idea of domestic manufacturing. Plants don't come online right away. It requires billions of dollars in investment, and those manufacturers believing that it's good long term for them to make this investment, right? So, like, you're not just going to kill an industry right away overnight if they make said investment, right? So it's more complicated than just do it right away. So feel good story, great, not reality.
So is there any part of you that believes that our government is wanting to kill clean energy? Because I don't think it's a hard transition to sunset or retro tariffs if domestic manufacturing isn't met by a certain date, sunset the subsidies at the end of 2026 versus the end of 2025 to give the market an opportunity to shift. If they don't support this runway, what does that say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest point. So I think when we've had this discussion, like people ask, hey, do you think this is going to happen? Is the Senate just going to pass it? And the thing that makes me feel the most encouraged is that they did ask for manufacturers to come to the United States. It's the whole part, the biggest part of Trump's agenda, right, is make America great, bring stuff back to America, don't be reliant on other countries. You've asked people to come here and do it. Companies have made billions of dollars of investments. Way to mute your phone, Cory.
Yes, it must be my wife. Sorry.
Thanks, Brittany. We should just call her and get her opinion on subsidies in the industry. But what were we just talking about? So the manufacturers that have made investments in the billions, they obviously got some subsidies from things like the Inflation Reduction Act, but also it wasn't just about the subsidies. It's a runway of business that there's a belief that we're trying to do energy in America. Yeah. When you just cut something like solar off the knees, don't we have conflicting agendas here? Like we wanted people to come manufacture here instead of buying from China or wherever, and then all of a sudden we basically pull the rug out from under them? How is that possibly correct? And that's why I believe this won't go through as is, because I don't think they care about like the average homeowner and that it's going to be more expensive for them to get solar. I think they care mostly about the manufacturing businesses, the factories that created jobs in these districts of senators that have to go answer to somebody. Yeah, we created $50,000 jobs with American Energy, but sorry, we're going to have to close that facility.
And let's not forget, I don't think you said this, maybe you did, but like the United States government already invested in these companies coming to the United States. So to take away the subsidy and basically lose all these jobs, like, why did you make that investment? Let's talk about waste for a second, right? They're worried about wasting dollars. You already subsidized bringing companies like Enphase, Q-Cells, REC to the United States to manufacture here, and to pull the rug out is actually it's wasting money. It's wasting American dollars.
Right. And it's killing jobs and taking away potential, taxes that are being paid into our whole system here. So I don't really know what the net benefit is. If you ask me, I think it's just as simple as we play team sometimes too much in politics, and the green agenda, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of this, Green New Deal, right, whatever buzzword you want to say, this is something that they want to strongly just reverse and say, no, thank you. But then somebody has to say, you can't just do that without the actual cause and effect that happens to real people, jobs, businesses that have invested in coming to the U.S. Like, you can't just do it because it feels good to send the proverbial middle finger to the other party. It's cute, but like, can we not be like middle schoolers and high schoolers here and act like adults that actually are trying to do good?
That's the frustrating part for me, because like my brain says it doesn't have to be like this. I don't disagree with trying to save money and trying to, again, like I keep saying, like the idea sounds fine, but the way that you approach the idea is a big deal.
So how would you do it? I'll put you on the spot. You're a senator. You got the floor. You're a Republican, so you're fiscally conservative. Let's just conjure up all that. What are you proposing to them right now and saying, this is how we should do it? This makes the most sense, all things considered.
There's got to be a sunset. I'd make it longer than 2026. So right now, the federal tax credit's set to expire, I think, in 2035. I would give the industry a 4-year runway, and it could even step down. It doesn't have to stay at 30%
to 25 to 20, whatever, something like that.
Let's be fair to an entire industry that's built American jobs. I think what we're talking about is close to 300,000 jobs in the solar industry, right? And manufacturing and all of this stuff. Let's sunset it at a longer runway, and also continue the approach for domestic manufacturing. If you want to do tariffs, I don't necessarily not support that, but the way that the tariffs were imposed this time, I don't agree with that. Like, no notice, again, no time to adjust.
It's so destabilizing.
Right. And I get that sometimes in order to make change, you've got to rip the Band-Aid off and like get things moving. I understand that mindset. But with the tariffs, the approach for me would be a retroactive tariff, be X% domestic by this date. And let's say 2 years from now, be domestic. Well, that's hard to build a plant in 2 years. By the end of the tax credit sunset, so 4 years from now, be X% domestic content, or have that stair step. You need to increase your domestic content year over year, and at the end of 4 years, be at X%, or you are subject to percent tariff. Write it in, whatever you want. They've got the warning. You're subject to that for whatever material didn't meet the criteria. Right. It makes all the sense in the world. It doesn't have to be this aggressive.
Yeah. And there is, I guess to be fair, a domestic component to the tax credit. And I will say I disagree with this. There's a 10% adder if you meet qualifications for domestic materials. 10% adder, meaning the normal project gets 30%, which is already very lucrative, you know, and then add an additional 10%. I believe that's the number for domestic. Right. So now it becomes a 40% tax credit. The problem is that's only available to people that are doing leases and PPAs. So is that value even getting to the homeowner, or are those big businesses just sucking it all up and taking the profits?
There are ways that we can make this better, like include that domestic requirement into the residential federal tax credit.
Yeah.
Sure. You know, like let's give that benefit to everybody. And that would honestly, you know, I'm talking about ripping the Band-Aid off. Like that would be abrupt, but it would help serve the purpose. Like the whole industry would pivot to domestic content for all projects, not just leases and PPAs. And I think that would be meaningful. So there are so many ways to approach this aggressively, in my mind, and get what we want out of it.
I think my vote would be sunset it this year for non-domestic. If you're not meeting domestic requirements, no tax credit. And then have the phase out schedule. I agree with you, 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that range. We can work with that.
Donnie, you hear this? Good idea. That's a good idea.
You can't say it to Elon anymore. I think he's off the whole
he's out.
Task force thing.
He's peaced out.
Yeah.
Trying to keep his job.
He has to go back to his solar company that he doesn't care about. All right. So I guess we kind of bled into my next topic, which was, it's going to happen, which is basically what's the effects of sunsetting early. So we covered a lot of that, but I do believe, I don't think I'm being dramatic in saying this, if the way it's written right now passes, you're going to see 50 to 75% retraction of the solar output, meaning like what's getting deployed in the field. The majority of companies will fail because even the larger companies are losing the main benefit that's keeping them around. Sunrun, most notably, right? Like they got pulled into this as soon as, I believe it got amended in the House for that revision where that part of the tax credit that affects them, right? So they're panicking and their stock dropped like 40-something% in a day, right? Everyone's panicking. So the people that honestly are going to make it through the year or two after transition are going to be the companies that are going to scale way down, right? Drop overhead significantly and be okay with being a very small company doing a lot of service, like a more traditional contractor model, right? New installations are a part of your business, but it's more servicing existing customers. The problem is most companies aren't built to make that pivot that quick.
Not this fast.
Not that fast. Yeah. And it's candidly just not lucrative, right? A business owner that has a lot of, might be very savvy, they're just gonna be like, this industry is not worth my time. I can do better, make more money somewhere else. So I think you're going to see a large exodus from the industry, which also means it's not just about the businesses losing money. It's not just about the people losing their jobs. It's about the people that have solar that won't get serviced anymore because all those companies aren't there. And then it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, solar wasn't good because now nobody's going to answer my service call when my inverter dies. Well, that's the thing, because we just unnecessarily executed the industry on a 6-month timeline, right? Like, so it's a huge problem. I truly believe, I know you think I jinx stuff or put stuff in the atmosphere.
No, please don't.
I truly don't believe it's going to go through as it is, because there has to be people there that understand the implications. I know they don't care about the individual person, a homeowner getting a tax credit and their energy getting subsidized, but they should care about the manufacturing that we brought in. They should care about the jobs. If they don't, then they're full of shit, right? Their whole agenda falls flat and they don't actually care about what they're saying.
If they truly only care about the dollars that they perceive we're going to save from removing this tax credit, they're not considering the American people and all the people that have made these investments, and not just people buying solar, but the businesses and the manufacturers and it's an entire industry linked to this one thing, that if they simply don't end it on the timeline that they're talking about, extend that a year or 2 years to give a runway, this all works.
Agreed.
It's pretty simple in my mind, and it's asinine if they don't see that.
All right, last segment. What should people do with this, right? Because this is looming. We don't know how long it's going to take for the Senate to make a decision. And when it drops, there could be depending on the most extreme version of language, only a couple months to basically act. And we need to have this installed by the end of the year. And installed might not even be good enough language. It might not even be fully operational, which requires the utility company to do their part, which they can drag their feet, and they traditionally do. So what should people do in your mind right now if they don't have solar, might need more solar? I mean, it's an obvious answer, but like walk through more detailed steps of like how to be thinking about this.
So, from my perspective, I think obviously we talked about a couple of things. Like, this is bad for contractors if this subsidy goes away on the timeline, right? So a homeowner has to be considering the contractor that I install with right now might not be around after this goes away,
so
right?
Picking the lowest bid right now, you might be picking the most likely candidate to not service you in the future, right?
Right.
More so than ever. That's always the case, but this is exaggerated.
Components, I think, are extremely important, because a large part of like what we do with our company is we use high quality components. And we don't need to service them very often. I mean, these things just work.
By high quality, you mean low failure rates, that sort of thing,
right? Low failure rates. So you're not having to call that contractor and say, "Hey, I've got a problem with my system." So reliable equipment, high quality stuff. So again, not the lowest bid. You're using high quality stuff. A high quality contractor. Ask them about their plan for the sunset. What are you planning to do when this tax credit goes away? And if they say, "Oh, don't worry about that, we're a huge company, we're going to be fine," that's probably not the answer you want to hear. You want to dig in and say, "I want to hear specifics."
The answer can't just be, "Don't worry about that, we don't have time to think about that."
Right.
Yeah, that's not the answer.
Right. And then at the end of the day, you should be prepared to carry on without the contractor that installed it. Because ultimately homeowners need to protect themselves. But, those two things, doing some research on the contractor and their plan for the transition and the products that you're going to get installed, I think are the most important things. But ultimately, to answer your question, get solar installed before the deadline.
There's going to be a run up here. We've seen events like this. Every installer is going to be inundated with requests, and their install calendar is going to build out. And again, this isn't something that they can build a pipeline into 2026. This is a have to have it done this year. So there will be a cutoff date of September, October, where like probably, if people are being honest, they shouldn't be taking a lot of new projects. They should be largely filled out for the year. Yep. So that leaves only a couple months to kind of take advantage of this, assuming nothing changes, right? And we have to operate on worst case scenario.
If you aren't signed up with a company by August, I think you are riding a line of potential issue. Yeah.
Because even if someone says, "Yes, we'll sign you up," and the paperwork shows that there's a tax credit in it, doesn't mean anything if they can't build you by the timeline that's required.
It also doesn't matter if the company says, "Oh, it's fine, we'll absolutely get you installed." They don't have control over the jurisdictions, and meaning the people that the contractor's going to get a permit from. They're going to be overwhelmed with permits. Just like when the net metering transition happened, these jurisdictions were overwhelmed with applications. They couldn't process them fast enough. So this is going to happen again. And like I said, if you're not signed up by August, I don't care who the contractor is or what they're telling you, do not trust whatever metric they're giving you. "Oh, I'll have you installed 2 weeks."
So I guess from a homeowner's perspective, this is easy. If you don't have solar and you're thinking about getting it, and let's be honest, whether you like it or think you're getting an EV, the utility companies keep raising rates, right? The rate increase this year was huge. It's going to continue. So whether you think you need it or not, you probably do need it, and you should be considering it. At the very least, do yourself a favor and figure out if it makes sense for you. Get a proposal, get a consultation from a trusted company.
Agree. Not the guy that knocks on your door. Research somebody and pick them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other tangent, right? So going back to like the side of the industry that like we'd be okay if it died, we'd be okay if that part of the industry died.
For sure. I mean,
Solar sells itself. You said it the other day, and it sounds obvious. Solar sells itself. We don't need people jamming it down your throat.
Right.
The utility companies, all the marketing we need, right? People are going to come with us when they don't want to pay an electric bill. We don't need people finding you and reaching out to you on timelines that make no sense, like that for you personally.
Something I think is interesting that like probably the viewers don't understand happens, but companies that, in my opinion, care only about volume and not about long-term relationships with homeowners, they're training right now. They are hiring all these young kids, bringing them to these fancy buildings and training them on how to knock doors and how to not take no for an answer and set appointments for solar. And I think half of what we're saying here is going to tell people like, hey, you really need to take advantage of this. You need to get solar this year. And it's going to be really convenient when some nice boy knocks on the door and says, hey, you want me to tell you about solar? You're going to be like, yeah. That's probably not the company that you want to be signing up with right now. You got to do your research.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds terrible to say, and I don't know if this still happens, but like literally in the past, right, we've seen the vans meeting in grocery store parking lots where they have a bunch of kids that they're going to drive and drop off in neighborhoods, and they just walk around and knock. These kids weren't in solar 2 weeks ago often. So again,
but they have a script.
To your point, right? Like who you picked always matters. Now it really, really matters when the likelihood that your service provider might not be in business is the highest it's ever been. So don't hesitate to start the process. Hesitate on who you pick and what you pick for the materials on your roof.
Do your research. I know that probably that sounds horrible. It sounds horrible to me to research what solar company around me other than ours is good to use, but it's so important.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. I'm sure, of course, as soon as we post this episode, something will change and it will invalidate most of what we said. But we waited a little bit. I think we hesitated to react to the initial news as this was passing through the various steps because it feels like it's going to be here for a month or two. It feels like there's a time period here for people to react. So, and if anyone's thinking like, well, if I act quickly, is there a downside? No. I mean, really, I don't see a reason not to. Prices on projects, especially with tariff implications, right? We can't bank on those coming down. There's no financing rates on the horizon that are going to drop to make this easier to finance. And even if the tax credit does get extended, all you did was get in front of this and start the process.
Yeah.
So
probably contact your senator and
let
them know that you're interested in keeping clean energy subsidies in place.
I hope those things work, right? I sign them all the time. I hope they work. But I think honestly what matters is when it boils down to who they've had relationships with to build factories and where they've invested money to make jobs. I think that's what ultimately is going to make the decisions in people's minds.
I agree.
So that's all I got. So let's wrap it up, and hopefully the next one we have a good update for everybody. And as usual, thanks for joining us for another episode of Speakeasy with Eric and Cory, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, buddy.